This sermon is brought to you by Bloomfield Presbyterian Church, Belfast. To know Jesus and share his love.
Luke 18, beginning at verse 9. To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everybody else, Jesus told this parable. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood up and prayed about himself. God, I thank you that I am not like other men, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Everyone, let me ask you this question. How did you feel about coming to church today? Maybe you didn't give it much thought, to tell you the honest truth, because it's just what you do on a Sunday. It's a habit. This is where you find yourself, so you didn't really particularly think about how you felt about coming along today. Maybe you were looking forward to it, not just the service, but everything that goes around it in terms of being together as a community in this place. How do you think you will feel when you leave church today? Glad that when, for the 14th time, the preacher said, finally, it did actually prove to be the final time. Maybe you hope that you'll have a sort of warm feeling that it was, good to be here, good to be with other people, that things went well, and so on. What about this question? How do you think God will feel about us when we leave church today? How will God feel about you and me when we leave church today? Now, there's a question for you. I wonder, have you ever thought of that? How will God feel about you and me when we leave church today? Does being here, in and of itself, does this please him? I mean, after all, we've sung the hymns, wonderful hymns. We've sat reverently through the reading and the prayers and so on. So we might feel that that's our duty to God done. Well done us. Does that make God happy? Does that please him? You see, the shocking thing in our passage today is that two men in this story set out to worship God in the temple. These two men stand before God in the company of God's people, and yet one leaves with God's approval and the other is rejected by God. That is pretty stark and surprising stuff, don't you think? So could we be here in church today and walk out without God's approval and favour upon us? Now, there's a question that should maybe make us all sit up and think. It is vitally important that we understand the hearts of the two men in the story that Jesus tells. Because if we grasp this story, then it lifts the lid on how we can be accepted by God and how we can leave this place knowing that we have God's approval upon us. If we grasp this, we will see what it means to be justified. Did you notice that in verse 14, Jesus says that one of these men went home justified before God? Now, to be justified means to be declared not guilty by God. The justified person has a right relationship with God. Here is the person who enjoys God's favour and approval. How it is that a person can be justified stands at the heart of this passage, and so it is worthy of our attention today. Jesus told great stories. He was the master storyteller. And very often, the stories that Jesus told were very simple on the surface. And yet they are designed to make us stop and think. They are deliberately provocative. So let's pick up the scene of this story in verse 10. 2 men went up to the temple to pray. One a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. Now, I want you to imagine that you've never heard this story before. And imagine it was turned into a short film. So here is the opening scene. We're introduced to 2 men, and we meet them in their homes as they prepare to set out to church one day. And very quickly, as the camera follows each man around their respective house, we realize that we're in the company of an admirable man and a scumbag. So in the first man's house, we watch as he puts on his Sunday best, pops in the fish lapel badge. The home is clean and tidy. We see a large Bible beside his bed. As he comes down the stairs, we see wedding photos and pictures of family and certificates of charitable giving and all that kind of thing. And we get the impression, here is an admirable man. The other man's house is dripping with wealth. But we quickly see that all is not good with this guy, and we wonder just how he came by this wealth. There's a kind of desperation to him. We catch him as he slams down the phone and says, "The money mustn't be seen in that account." And we look at his desk and we see all sorts of invoices from companies and people with strange names from, based in exotic places and islands. And we just wonder what's going on with this guy. And we notice on this guy's desk a photograph of him in the company of someone who frankly looks like a crook or a gangster. Here is an admirable man and a scumbag. You see, at the start of this short film, we have no doubt about who the good guy is. And Jesus' listeners would have been just the same. Because you see, the admirable guy in this story is clearly the Pharisee. The Pharisees took God's law really seriously. They were known for their piety. That's why they were so influential. People looked up to them. The tax collector is the scumbag. You'll know that tax collectors were collaborators with the Roman occupying forces, so they're politically on the wrong side. They're dirty, they associate with Gentiles, they hang out with the wrong people, and they're rogues. Often they extorted more money than was right and lived in luxury on the proceeds. So here is an admirable man and a scumbag, and they're setting out to church. Or more accurately, for the time, they're setting out to the temple. In those days, there were services twice every day in the temple, morning and evening. There would be morning and evening the sacrifice of a spotless lamb for the sins of the people. And around that sacrifice was a kind of service which would have included time for public and private prayer. The temple itself was hugely significant. Jesus called it the house of God. It represented the dwelling place of God among his people. So here, in a sense, we have these 2 men, and they are making an approach to God. The admirable guy and the scumbag. So how is that going to work out as they head to the temple this day? Well, Jesus' listeners would have had little doubt. The Pharisee is the worthy fellow. And we'd wince at the mention of the tax collector. Maybe in our short film we'd see them as the Presbyterian elder on the one hand and the known fraudster on the other, and they're on their way to church. The first guy makes sense. We see the second and we kind of think to ourselves, you serious? Hope they keep that person out. And that's the scene. And the one we identify with, as in any good story, is the good guy, and that is the Pharisee here, or so it seems. But now you see, Jesus gives us a spiritual cardiogram of each man. A spiritual cardiogram, what do I mean by that? Well, Jesus lets us hear each of these persons' prayer life. Prayer exposes our hearts. It's like a spiritual cardiogram. Ever thought of that? What would be exposed if you were to hear my prayer life? What would I learn about you if I were to hear your prayer life? Well, it would expose our hearts, wouldn't it? And what is most on our heart? So let's listen carefully to the prayer life of each of these men. First, there is the Pharisee. Let's take a look at verses 11 and 12. The Pharisee stood up and prayed about himself, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I get. Do you notice that the Pharisee's prayer really is more of a declaration to God more than anything else? He is basically saying to God, I'm a good guy. That's his approach to God. I wonder, do we do similar things, even kind of subconsciously? We might say, well, I've never done any of the big sins. I've never stolen anything. I've been faithful to my wife or husband. I've been straight with people. I've not cheated in business. I'm a decent guy. I'm a good guy. In fact, not only have I not done some bad stuff, I've actually done a lot of good stuff. I've gone to church. I give to charity. I even did a leg of the marathon for children in need. The Pharisee was very religious. Jewish people in that time only had to fast once a year. The Pharisee fasted twice a week. He didn't just give a little bit of some of his stuff. He gave a tenth of all he got. And perhaps kind of along with him, we'd be tempted to say to God, Lord, there are stacks of people worse than I am. When you think about it, Lord, I'm a good guy. I wonder, are we tempted to think like that today? We like to think that respectability counts, don't we? I do. Now here's a confession in a BB stronghold. I was in the Scouts. I can hear the gasp. This was not me. But when the Scouts were founded, it was very much seen as a positive moral influence among young people. It was to produce respectable young men. So here is what the London Evening Standard observed in the early days of the last century as the scouting movement was getting going. The Boy Scout at 19 will be something very different from the cigarette-smoking street corner loafer who diversifies his indolence by occasional bursts of hooliganism. The Scout will be smart, clean, alert, well-mannered. I like to think that describes how I turned out. We like to think that respectability counts, don't we? We all like to think that that kind of respectability counts. And shouldn't it count with God? If we apply for a job, we want to get it on our merits. And this admirable man in our story approaches God in the same way. He thinks he's going to get there on merit. Surely he deserves God's thumbs up. And everyone, I wonder, do we all kind of slip into that way of thinking? We're good Christian people from solid evangelical Ulster. Surely God should be pleased with us and our heritage. However, if we think this way, then Jesus, through the character of the Pharisee, exposes our hearts. Because this thinking exposes hearts filled with self-righteousness and pride. When we stop to think about it, we see it so clearly in the Pharisee. He stands apart from others in the temple. He thinks he's a cut above everyone else. He's not going to be sullied by them. And did you notice his prayer is all about himself? God, I thank you that I am not like other men. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I get. It's all I. Prayer, if anything, is meant to express our dependence upon God. This man confesses nothing. He doesn't ask God for anything. He doesn't think he actually needs anything from God. He's a good guy, just as he is. His prayer, if anything, is really a prayer of self-congratulation. It's as if he is actually doing God a favor by showing up at the temple that day. God should be pretty pleased to have this guy on his side. You see, when we think we're pretty good, the next step is that we often look down at others that we deem to be not so good. And that is exactly what the Pharisee does. He thinks he's good enough for God. And the danger is that we might be tempted to think like him. One writer comments that self-righteousness is the family disease of all the children of Adam. Everyone, if we think we can stand before God and be accepted by him on the basis of our merit, then we need to hear the profound warning from the lips of Jesus. Please note, it is not my warning. These are Jesus' words. This man leaves not justified before God. Do you feel the shock of that? It is the shock of the message of Jesus. Our merit cannot, does not, will not put us right with God. Here was a man whose moral life probably surpassed that of all of us in this room, and yet it did not put him right with God. There's a warning we need to heed. Let's take a look at the other man. Do look at verse 13. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Well, there could hardly be a greater contrast, could there? This tax collector isn't saying, look at me, I'm a good guy. His assessment of himself is that he is a sinner. In fact, he actually says in the original language, have mercy on me, the sinner. Have mercy, please. He knows that by nature he's not worthy of God. He is one who has gone his own way in life rather than God's, for that's what it is to be a sinner, and we're all in that condition. His whole attitude conveys that of someone who knows that he is not deserving of God's favor. He stands far off. There's real distress as he beats his chest. He's racked with a sense of guilt and inadequacy, and his prayer is a plea for mercy. In fact, it's actually more than that. The word used for mercy here is a special word. It's not the normal word that would be used. It's a verb. Boys dears, we've got all signs this morning, haven't we? The word for mercy there is a word that is used for the making of atonement. So as the tax collector stands in the temple with the smoke rising from the altar where a lamb has just been sacrificed, he is saying, God, please have mercy on me. Please provide a sacrifice of atonement for me. Please provide a sacrifice that will deal with my sin, that will turn your righteous anger away. Please provide a sacrifice that will enable you to look on me with favor. You see, here is a man who knows that by nature he stands cut off from God. He knows that he stands in need before God. He can't rely on his own record. He needs rescue. He's got no merit. He needs mercy. And he realizes that if he is to be right with God, he needs God to act. He needs the gift of God to step in and deal with his sin. Only then can he be reconciled with God. And everyone, this tax collector's realization is the realization of anyone who comes to a true appreciation of themselves and of God. There's a prophet in the Old Testament called Isaiah, and I'm sure you know the scene where Isaiah is granted a vision of God on his glorious throne, and his robe fills the temple. And as Isaiah sees this scene of majesty and glory and holiness, well, he's brought to an end of himself, and he says, woe to me, I am ruined. You see, no one can stand before the awesome holiness and perfection of God and have a big view of themselves. The Pharisee was judging by the wrong standard. He looked around and he was judging himself based on comparison to other people and thinking, well, hey, I'm better than them, so God should accept me. His standard of comparison was to other sinful people. His standard should have been God himself. I remember going to a theme park in America as a child. The roller coasters had a minimum height requirement, and there were height gauges at the start of the queues. Again, that's not me. But there was one particular roller coaster that I really wanted to go on. But by the height gauge, I wasn't tall enough. And before, just to anticipate the thought, I would be tall enough now, okay? But anyway, look, that's by the by. The point is this. There were these height gauges. It would have done me no good to have gone to the attendant by the height gauge and say, "You should let me in, I'm taller than my friend here." You see, comparing myself to my friend was not the right standard of comparison. The standard of comparison was to the ultimate, the true measure, the height gauge that was there. And everyone before a holy God, any record of merit that we want to present on our own account counts for nothing, because it does not measure up to the measure of God himself. We find that we need mercy. Notice verse 14. Jesus says this, "I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." In other words, and here is the good news, there is a way in which sinful people can be right with God. The tax collector knew he needed God to make the move to provide atonement for him, and that is exactly what God has done. John writes, "This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins." Peter states, "Christ died for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God." You see, everyone, it is the teller of this story, Jesus himself, who offers us mercy. Mercy on account of what he went on to do in going to the cross in the place of sinners. He is the one who makes it possible for any of us to be accepted by God. The thing is, to receive that, we need to come humbly, knowing that we need God's mercy, that we can't earn our way to him through our own attempts at moral decency. With the hymn writer, we say, "My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. No merit of my own I claim, but wholly trust in Jesus' name." Where does this leave us today? Well, how will God feel about you and me when we walk out of this place today? It depends. It depends. Are we trying to relate to God on the basis of our own merit or of his mercy? I have to warn you that if it's on the basis of our own merits, then that can't work. It won't work. But if it is on the basis of his mercy, then we can go home today with a spring in our steps, knowing that God has justified us, that he has welcomed us into his family with open arms of love. Now, this is humbling news because we need to be honest with God about our need for his rescue. But this is great news for us as well. It is great news for sinners. Perhaps you know today you're here all too acutely aware that you are not worthy of God, and you have wondered if he could ever possibly accept you. The great news of this story is, yes, he can. He can accept anyone here. He has given his Son. God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that he might show you mercy. So let's all ensure that we are resting in that mercy today. Tear up our record of achievement and humbly turn to Jesus. He will never turn anyone away who comes to him.
Thank you for listening to Bloomfield Presbyterian Church Sermon Audio. We're a congregation in East Belfast. For more information, visit bloomfieldpresbyterian.org.